Good morning. You are a handsome group of men and beautiful group of women. I'm not saying that. I really believe it. Because beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And handsomeness, that's left up to God. So I've been dealing with something. First, I want to start off by asking you a question. Are you building a gallows or a garden? Are you building a gallows or a garden? We're going to get back to that question a little later, but it's something for you to ponder. Not that you need any more distractions while I preach. Down the street from my house, actually it's down the street from the church, just a block that way. There's a couple of houses on the corner that always have immaculate yards. If you've driven by more than a couple times, you know which two houses I'm talking about. And I love driving by and thinking, man, I sure wish my yard looked that nice. How many people are with me? Now, if I could only convince myself that, man, I wish I would work as hard on my yard as they do, then I would have a yard that looks as nice as theirs. But let's be honest, there's too much golf to do for me to spend that much time on my yard. Actually, I have a front yard that is full of rocks. I have a front yard that is full of weeds. I spray the rocks with weed killer. I go out and I pull the weeds, and they always seem to come back. I am convinced that rock can grow weeds like nothing else. I want to get rid of all that rock and put grass there, because at least if I have weeds growing in grass, you can't see it. Weeds growing in rock, everybody can see it. You see those green things sprouting up. We want a certain thing in life, and the question is, how hard are we willing to work for that certain thing? For some of us, we want to make an impact at our job. And so we're willing to work really hard to make an impact, to get that raise, to get that promotion. For some of us, we want to have an impact on the golf course. And I'm not talking about divots either. I have plenty of those that I didn't mean to hit. Some of us want to have an impact in our families, in our children, and we work really hard that we're going to have an impact on our children. Okay, if you're a parent and you have children, you're going to have an impact in their life. The question is, what kind of impact are you going to have, and how big is that impact? And we all work toward things and desire things, and the question is, what are we working for? What are we putting most of our efforts toward? Because that will say a lot about what we believe about life and about what we believe about eternity. Now, the question, are you building a gallows or a garden? You know what a gallows is? You draw one every time you play hangman. How many people have ever played hangman? All right. As an 8-year-old, having an 8-year-old, I'm not 8 years old. I have an 8-year-old. He's not quite yet there to play hangman, but I'm waiting for the day he is. I think we've played a couple of times, but he just, I always win, because all of his words are 3 letters, and they're really easy to guess. Whereas when I'm not one of those guys that always takes it easy on his kid. So when I am going to guess a word, I'm going to guess a word that he has never heard before. Superstitious. He's never going to get it, and I'm going to win. Now, sometimes I'll do. I don't believe in participation trophies, and I don't believe your kid should always win when they play you in a game, because that's not life. What are you building? Are you building a gallows, or are you building a garden? To answer that question, we're going to look at not the answer to that question, because you're the only one who can really determine what you're building. I can tell you what I think you're building, but that's only by what I see or what I hear you say to me. You're the only one who really knows apart from God himself. And so what I want to do is I want to look at what it looks like to build these things. And then you can decide for yourself which one you are building. And if you're building the wrong one, maybe you should change construction companies. I have heard stories, and I can't count how many times I've heard stories of somebody hiring a construction company. They come in, and they do a lousy job, a terrible job. And the people already pay them, and there's nothing they can do. Or you pay somebody up front, and they never show up. I more than I have fingers, I've heard that story. And I'm not saying that you should not, when I did construction, I worked for, it wasn't a small construction company, but it wasn't really big either, a project manager, and we had a deposit that everybody paid. And that deposit would cover all of the materials we had to purchase before the next draw. So if they want to do a remodel, and we had $10,000 in lumber in materials that we had, they had to give us that $10,000. We weren't going to stick our neck out there, so they didn't. And that's partly because the owner, who happens to be my cousin, he's like me. He doesn't trust a whole lot of people, especially out in society. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt a lot of times, but when it comes to money, I need money to live off of, and so I'm very hesitant to trust some people, especially people I can know nothing really about. What are you building, and do you need to change your construction company? Who are you having it build for you? So we're going through the Sermon on the Mount. We talked about the Beatitudes a couple months ago. And the Beatitudes, let's really recap real quick. The Beatitudes was not a recipe for success in the kingdom of God. It was characteristics that kingdom people exhibit. Okay? So if you are a kingdom person, if you're somebody who has a relationship with Jesus and you're bound and you're going to heaven and you love him, these are the characteristics that will come out in your life, the Beatitudes. Then, more recently, we talked about what does morality from God's perspective look like? Morality from God's perspective, which deals with hate and murder, deals with adultery and lust. If you missed any of those, you can go back and listen to them. Jesus was not saying that God's law was no longer, you didn't have to obey it anymore. He wasn't saying, oh, you don't have to not kill anybody. No, you have to not kill people. But he digs a little deeper. He says, not only do you not kill people, you just don't hate them either. Because when you hate somebody, you've killed them in your heart. He's not saying you can commit adultery. He's saying, no, you should not commit adultery. But when you lust after somebody in your heart, You've already crossed that line from God's perspective. And he deals with those things, those moral conduct that we have with each other. Then he moves into a section in chapter 6 where he starts talking about religious things. Now, it's important to understand that while we are taking sections out of the Sermon on the Mount and talking about them, Jesus got up, sat down one day, and just started teaching. All of this was one long teaching, and so we sometimes like to go, well, we're going to start in chapter 6, and we're going to read verses 1 through 4, which is what we're going to do this morning. But we cannot forget what we've already talked about, because that is the basis for how we understand what we're about to read. Matthew chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. Watch out. Don't do your good deeds publicly to be admired by others, or you will lose the reward from your Father in heaven. When you give to someone in need, don't do as the hypocrites do, blowing trumpets in the synagogues and streets to call attention to the acts of their charity. I tell you the truth, they have received all the reward they will ever get. But when you give to someone in need, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Give your gifts in private, and your Father who sees everything will reward you. Jesus, continuing in his message to the people, makes a statement in verse 1 of chapter 6 that encompasses the next 20 verses. Now, we're only going to be talking about the next 3 verses, but it encompasses the next 20 verses. He talks about giving, he talks about prayer, and he talks about fasting. Today, we're only going to be dealing with the first one, the first giving, and you notice he doesn't address what you give. And there's a reason for that. And I don't want to go into this, but Jesus had already expected that they were regular givers, according to what the Old Testament said. There are other places where we can dive into how and what we should give. That's for another message. But the fact that he said, when you give, instead of if you give, it was something they did. It was a common, in fact, it was commanded for them to give. And this giving is not the required giving. Okay, if you know anything about the Bible, you know that the Old Testament gave very strict understandings of how specifically Jews were to give. They were to give their tithe, which just simply means 10, their first fruits, the best and first 10% that they have. That's what they were going to give. But they were also expected to give even more than that. This is not just a New Testament thing. They were to give fellowship offerings. I mean, they had a whole list of offerings that they were to give above and beyond their 10%. And so that's what this is. He's not talking about what God requires from them. He's talking about what extra God wants from them. And they understood that. And so they did this. And so when he says, when you do it, he's understanding that they are already doing that. And if they were doing it, they knew they should have been doing it. Verse 1. I'm not a really big fan of how the New Living Translation says it. Here's what it says in the New Revised Standard Version. Beware of practicing your piety before others in order to be seen by them, for then you have no reward from your Father in heaven. The reason I like this is because of that word piety. A really good answer. definition is your religious service. Your religious service. The things you do for God. That's kind of what he's talking about here. So he's saying, when you are practicing, when you are doing, not if, when you're doing these things, be careful that you don't do them for the wrong reason. The wrong reason being in order to be seen by them, others. When you do them, if you do them for that reason, you forfeit the reward God has for you in eternity. It's a sobering idea to think that it's easy, very easy, to lose a reward God has for us just by thinking the wrong thoughts. They were doing the right thing. They were practicing, they were giving, as it were. And the term here, if you read more little, it's almsgiving is what the phrase is used. Almsgiving. When you give alms, and what alms were just giving money to poor people. That's pretty much what it was. You would just. Have you ever seen a movie where you see royalty being pulled in a carriage with horses, and people are standing around cheering and waving hands and reaching up and calling out to them? You know why they do that? It wasn't because they were in love with them. It's because it was common for royalty, as they were going through town, to throw coins out. And they did that because they loved the people? Maybe. But they also wanted the people to see what they were doing. Almost like buying faithfulness. Now, you can't say that all of them did it that way, because ultimately we don't know anybody's heart but our own, and sometimes we don't even know our own heart. But the idea of giving to those in need, for them, it was much more real than it was for us today. Okay? For them, there was a huge gap between the wealthy and the poor. And there were very few people in between. We don't understand this because in America today, you never experience anybody or see anybody who is in extreme poverty worldwide. Nobody in America lives in extreme poverty. You know how I know? Because I don't see anybody in America digging through garbage to find food. So we have to understand that what we're reading about here, when he says giving to those in need, he's talking about giving to those who have nothing, and it very well could lead to their death. And so you're giving to them, but you are giving to them for the right reason. The difference between earthly reward and a heavenly reward. If we do something for the right reasons, we get a heavenly reward. If we do something for the wrong reasons, we get just an earthly reward. And I really struggled with the idea of how to adequately understand or communicate this understanding to you, because in reality we have no clue as human beings what heavenly reward will look like. We just don't know. The Bible doesn't say, here is what your heavenly reward will look like. And so it's hard to communicate that. So I thought about a couple of examples that maybe will help us give us, and they're faulty, but they're the best I can come up with. So ask yourself, if you were going to get a reward, would you want a reward from somebody who has access to $5? Or would you want reward from somebody who has access to $50 billion? How many people would want a reward from somebody who has access to $5? Go ahead and raise your hand. We'll be having a prayer meeting afterwards for you. No, if we knew that this guy has $50 million, $1 billion at his disposal, we would much rather have a reward from him because he could give you $1 million and it wouldn't really be much to him. The guy who has $5, on the other hand, if he's really generous, he might give you $1. That's 20% of what he has. Do the math at what 20% of what the $50 billion guy has, and it'll be astounding to you. And then, how about this? You're going to go on vacation. Jeanette and I are going to be leaving on vacation here in the next couple of weeks, and we're going to Florida. We love Florida. St. Augustine, great place. It's warm. I love it down there. There are a lot of golf courses. Eli wants to go to a museum. He is not my kid if he wants to go to a museum. But he loves going to the museums, so we take him to the museums. If someone was going to give you a free vacation, all right, and 1,500 miles away, okay, and one person was going to say, here you go, here's a bus ticket, have fun. Better yet, here's a new pair of sneakers. And the other person says, you know what, here's a plane ticket. Unless you really want to exercise, you're going to take the plane ticket. How about if somebody wanted to make you a meal, and they invited you over, and they put a strawberry in front of you? I love strawberries. A strawberry? Or somebody who came over and invited you over for dinner and then made this immaculate buffet of all-you-can-eat favorite desserts. And, desserts, but we'll do the main course first because you don't want to get full up on dessert. Which one would you rather have? Not hard to decide. Maybe you're not into food. How about this? Somebody says, I'm going to give you a car. This person over here says, I'm going to give you a 1980s Ford Pinto. Yes. I had a Ford Pinto when I was in college. I was pretty cool driving that thing around. Or at least I thought so. But this person over here decides to give you a 2024, you name it. I mean, not everybody likes trucks. But you see the difference? Or somebody wants to take you out to eat. One person wants to take you to McDonald's for a Big Mac, but you're really craving pasta, and the other person says, here, let me take you to the all-you-can-eat buffet of steak, shrimp, and pasta at Olive Garden. I'm going to McDonald's. No. You know I love golf, so I had to throw this in there. One person wants to give you a couple of bucks to buy a bucket of balls at a driving range. And another person says, I'm going to give you a lifetime membership at this golf course. That also includes these 4 other golf courses. We all know which one we want, and yet how many times do we fight for the things that are rewarded in this life alone? We settle for the Ford Pinto. We settle for the Big Mac. We settle for a bucket of balls at the driving range. We settle for our front yard full of rocks, trying to get weeds out of them. How do we do that? How do we do that? We do that by doing things so that other people can see them. says, don't let your good deeds be publicized to be admired by others. Don't practice your piety before others. Don't practice your giving in this instance to be seen by others. Because when you do, when that's your motivation, you are trading in your 2024 brand new vehicle for a 1980s Pinto. You are trading in that yummy, yummy, stomach-filling food at Olive Garden for a Big Mac that is no longer big. Now, we have to address something. We are supposed to do things in secret. Our good deeds, our piety is what it says. We're supposed to do those in secret. Then how come in chapter 5 of this same book, Matthew chapter 5, verse 16, Jesus just got done saying this right here before he says that. In the same way, let your good deeds shine out for all those to see, so that everyone will praise your heavenly Father. Jesus is a lunatic. Sure, go do all your good things and so that all your good deeds so God can be praised. And then he goes says, oh, do it in private. Make sure you do it in private because you don't want to lose your reward. Well, which way is it, God? Jesus, you got to help me out here because you're confusing me. Two things you need to understand. One, the good deeds that we read about in Matthew 5 and the piety, the good things that we read about in chapter 6 are not identical. The good deeds that we are doing, that he calls them to do in chapter 5, remember, this is toward the end of the Beatitudes. And it's about letting your light shine in a dark world. He's talking about doing your deeds to those in front of those people who do not know God. You skip forward to chapter 6. Now he's talking about giving to the needy, and he's talking to a bunch of Jews who believe in God. And he's saying, do these good things, these acts of righteousness, these religious things, do them, but not to be looked good upon by everybody else, who are all, for a matter of fact, the same as you. They're all Jews. They were all Jews. There's a completely different feel between shining your light so that they could see God's glory and doing things so other people can see your glory. And that is the difference. One is we do things so people can see it so God gets the glory. But how many times do we do things and we say it's for God's glory, but we like the recognition it gives us. We like the recognition it gives us. And I'm not saying that recognition in and of itself is wrong. I had to learn as a young pastor, I had to learn how to graciously receive recognition. Because if we receive recognition in a way that is not befitting, we lose the reward that God has for us. When I was a youth pastor, and I put on this event, and it was huge. There was a group of churches actually came together and put this event on. We had like 50 volunteers. We had like 600 teenagers, and it was a couple hours long, and they weren't expected to come and stay. They just passed through. Like 600 teenagers come through. It was amazing to see God do this work. And pastor got up and he was commenting on that, and I was like sulking in my chair. Because I had this idea that this was something I did. Being gracious in receiving recognition is realizing, first and foremost, it ain't about you. Sure, your name is mentioned, but it ain't about you. When we were living in New Jersey, we had a family who didn't have a lot of money. In fact, they had less money than we had, and I was a youth pastor, and I was the main source of income. So it was not a lot of money there. They had less than we did, and they continually, at Christmas and my birthday, they continually would give me a small check. Wasn't much, but I knew they could use it somewhere else. And so the first couple of times that they gave me a check, I said, you guys don't do this. Please don't do this. And the senior pastor at the church there, there wasn't a lot that I learned from him. But this one thing I did learn from him, and that is that when you don't allow them to give, you don't allow God to bless them. Learn to be gracious and give God the glory. And so when people give me something, I will mention once, you don't have to do this. If they continue to do it, I keep my mouth shut, because it is no longer in my hands. I've said, this is a conviction that God has put on me. I've said what I was supposed to say. We need to learn to be able to take recognition the right way and not the wrong way. Because once we take recognition, whether we did something for the right reason or not, once we take recognition the wrong way, it suddenly becomes about us. And we lose the thing, the blessing that God wants to give us. At that point, we are trading in our brand new 2024 Chevy truck. $3,500 for a Pinto. That if you put 400 pounds in the back of it, the wheels will rub the fender. I know this. So Jesus says something in this. When you give to someone in need, don't do it as the hypocrites do, blowing trumpets in the synagogues and streets to call attention to their acts of charity. How many people have ever seen the Academy Awards? Any parts of the Academy Awards, okay? You know, that big whole deal. I was never into Academy Awards. I didn't like award ceremonies at all, whether it's sports ceremonies, acting ceremonies. You know what? A couple weeks ago, Crystal went and got her ordination at the district council. A couple years ago, I got mine. I wanted to not go. I got my Master of Divinity the first year I was here, 2018, that winter. I wasn't going to go to graduation because I just don't like that kind of stuff. But my boss told me I had to. That was my wife, by the way. She's not really my boss. I know because she told me. I'm digging a hole. And she's giving me the shovel. I'm not much for that. So to watch it for somebody else is not very. I'll go and support who's ever getting the award, But I'm not going to torture myself having to sit and watch the Academy Awards. But if Satan had an award, an Academy Award that he was going to give out, hypocrisy would be it. Hypocrisy. Are you who you say you are? That word hypocrisy in the Bible comes from the Greek idea of, it's used in the theater for play acting. A person who acts well as somebody else would be called a hypocrite. Don't you all want to be actors now? I was in drama for many years. I loved pretending to be somebody I wasn't. There was a time for that. But when it comes to real life, if that becomes our nature, we instantly get the award from Satan, the Academy Award that says, you're doing exactly what I want you to do. Hypocrisy comes in all shapes and sizes. It says here that they were blowing trumpets in the synagogues and calling attention to what they were given. We don't necessarily do that, okay? One of the things that was a concern of mine when we changed the way we took up offering, people come up and give offering in the bucket. One of the concerns of mine was making sure people have the right heart in doing it. That's why we have buckets in the back. And it's not to say that everybody that comes up here gives to be seen. I think that's sometimes people come up here and give in the front as a show of we can do this. To encourage you, not to deceive you. How do you know the difference? Guess what? You don't. God does. That's why we can't be judges. All we can judge is a person's behavior. We cannot judge a person's intent. We are not to call attention to ourselves, but that does not mean that God does not call attention to us. There's a subtle difference. There's a story in Esther. You probably know the story of Esther, and if you don't, I'm going to help you out with that. About a man named Haman. So, really quick. King gets mad at his wife, sends her away. Esther comes. She's a Jew. Comes, becomes queen. Okay? A man wants to be recognized. Haman. Mordecai doesn't recognize him the way he wants to. So Haman builds a gallows. You knew it was coming, didn't you? And he's going to hang Mordecai on it because Mordecai was not giving him. Eventually, Haman wanted to eliminate all Jews, not just Mordecai. He wants to eliminate all of them. Queen intervenes, and everybody's happy. And guess what happens to Haman? If you don't know, we're going to find out. Esther chapter 3, verses 1 through 5, it says, "Sometimes later, King Xerxes prompted Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, over the other. He elevated him over the other nobles, making him the most powerful official in the empire. Haman, yes, the man who eventually just betrays, who seeks recognition. All the king's officials would bow down before Haman to show him respect whenever he passed by. For so the king had commanded." How many of you, every time you walk by, everybody went, that would be uncomfortable for me. But I guess there are people who like that. I don't know. But Mordecai refused to bow down or show him respect. There's a whole lot to this that I'm not going to get into, but it was a matter of godliness more than anything else. Then the palace officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai, "Why are you disobeying the king's command?" They spoke to him day after day, but still he refused to comply to the order. So they spoke to Haman about this to see if he would tolerate Mordecai's conduct, since Mordecai had told them he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not bow down or show him respect, he was filled with rage. When somebody who thrives on recognition and does not get the recognition they perceive they deserve, it creates an emotional response. With Haman, it was rage. With some of us, it might be sorrow. With some of us, it might be disgust. With some of us, it might be, we might think we're worthless. We might seem invaluable to people because, and all of this is because there's a perceived idea that we thought we should get that we didn't. It doesn't matter whether we got it or not. We didn't think we did. And so it creates an emotional response. Esther 4, verse 15. Let a gallows 50 cubits high be made, and in the morning tell the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. Then go with the king to the banquet in good spirit. So this advice pleased Haman, and he told the gallows to be made. So one of his advisors, Haman's not happy, so one of his advisors said, build a gallows nice and big so everybody can see it, and then let Mordecai die on it. And again, there's so much more to this story that I'm not, but I wanted to emphasize this attitude that we see in Haman. One thing if you get down to verse 6, or chapter 6, verse 9, it says this. One of the eunuchs in attendance on the king said, look, the very gallows that Haman has prepared for Mordecai, whose word saved the king, stands at Haman's house, 50 cubits high. And the king said, hang him on that. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the anger of the king abated. We build things in our lives by decisions, not just decisions we make, but certain attitudes that we have that could be the instrument of our downfall, just like Haman. And again, there's a whole lot more to this story that I'm not getting into. But it deals with the underlying idea of what do we really want? What do we really want? Do we want an immaculate front yard? Or do we want rocks with weeds growing out of them? I think everybody wants an immaculate yard. I think everybody wants it to look pretty. I've never heard somebody ever brag about how ugly their house is. But are we willing to do the right thing to get us there? Are you willing to do what it takes to build a garden of flowers? Or are you just relying on your emotion to appease you, and as a result, building a gallows in which will be your downfall? The gallows is a very good picture of death. The garden, according to God, It's a very good image of life. What are you building? A garden? Are you seeking recognition for something? Are you trying to get the approval of men? When you go to church, do you go to church for God, or do you go to church because you know people are expecting you to be there? When you give, do you give because you want to be a good Christian and be seen by other people? When you say things, do you say things differently at church than you do at work? When you wear clothes, do you wear a different style of clothes around your Christian friends than you do other times? I'm not suggesting that we are perfect by any means. Although right before Jesus talks about this, he says, "Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect." And then he goes in to show us how unperfect we really are. He closes with the idea that we are to do things, and when we do them, to not let our right hand know what our left hand is doing. Be honest. How many of you are like, God, now I know you're crazy? Because I was. Because no matter how hard I try, whenever something gets done with this hand knows about it. It's usually because this hand has to help this hand. What is he trying to say? And I've read a lot of books and illustrations as to what. So I had one guy relate it to the church and say, don't let other Christians in one hand know what you are doing, which seems to be. I had one guy say, well, a husband and wife become one, and so when you give, don't tell your wife about it. Don't do his advice. I believe giving is a couples thing. I think both of you should talk about it, both of you hear from God, and decide together. What does he mean by don't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing? I think the best illustration that I read is this. Once you do it, forget about it. Once you do it, forget about it. Because once you do it and you forget about it, you are never tempted to bring it back up in conversation. For some of us, me in particular, that's not hard to do. You know, I'll forget what I spoke about this time next week. It's not hard for me to forget things fairly quickly. And I don't think God is trying to say that you forget everything. Because I'm going to be talking about next week how we should remember things. It's Memorial Day. We're going to be talking about remembering things. What I think he's saying is forget and don't talk about it. Don't use it. Sure, use it. You could use it to encourage somebody, but don't use it to proclaim yourself. Don't use it as a way of gaining recognition. Everybody's going to be recognized. I want everybody to know that. Everybody's going to be recognized. You're either going to be recognized by man or you're going to be recognized by God. You get to choose which one of those happens. One of the things that, so I'm part of a study that really dives into the Jewish background and understanding of the Bible. And one of the things that in the course of studying one of the sections, they talked about what we expect in return. And I thought this was very profound when I started thinking about this, and it speaks volumes as to how we misunderstand things. When we do something for somebody, even for somebody we have absolutely no relation with, complete stranger, and you do something for them, you should not expect anything in return, correct? You're doing it because you love God and God wants you to do it. You do it. And then how many times do we, if they leave and don't say thank you, do we think they didn't even say thank you? Were you doing it for the thank you? Well, you must have been, because you got upset because they didn't say thank you. Or if you gave money to somebody and they snatched it out of your hand real quick and ran away. And you say, well, that wasn't right. Are you not expecting something? You're expecting decency from them, right? We need to make sure that when we are doing things, especially things, religious things, giving, serving, when we're doing these things, we need to make sure that our heart is in line and our thoughts are too. Because if our thoughts aren't in line, we're going to be trading the garden that God has for us for a gallows. Heavenly Father, we love you and we thank you. We seek your forgiveness. For many times we have done things with the right heart, but our mind got in the way. And we need you to help us. Help us renew our mind daily. Help us to not seek the gratification here, the recognition here. To help us do things in private, in secret. Not even to bolster our ego, but Lord, to humble ourselves in giving because you gave to us. In all things, let us worship and give you the glory and take none for ourselves. Give us the strength this day, this week, as we go out and we're living life. We seek to give recognition instead of take it. To push recognition towards you instead of desiring it for ourselves. Help us, Lord, to build a garden and not a gallows. We thank you. We love you. And we ask all of this in your name. Amen. Amen. Hey, love you guys. Be blessed. Just a reminder, next week, church in the park, and then a meal afterwards.